Welcome back to my channel, Hidden Points. Today, we're stepping into the mind of the critic, that person who stands at the edge of every conversation, ready to dissect, tear apart, and expose flaws most of us never even notice. You might think it's about judgment, but the truth is far darker. The critic isn't just evaluating, they're driven by a deep inner pressure to protect themselves from disappointment, chaos, and rejection. Today, we dive into the hidden psychology that shapes this mindset. The critic is not who you think they are. Sometimes, the one who judges the world the hardest is the one who fears being judged the most. Imagine a girl named Leela sitting in the back of the classroom. She makes tiny comments about how everyone else speaks, walks, and thinks. Her voice is sharp, her eyes scan every detail. People think she's harsh, but in reality, Leela spent years at home, hearing constant comparisons, constant reminders that nothing she did was good enough. Her criticism isn't born from cruelty, but from fear. Fear that someone will see the insecure child she hides under layers of evaluation. Now, imagine a boy named Kareem. He critiques every movie, every teacher, every idea. Why? Because if he points out the flaws first, no one can attack him. His criticism feels like armor, a shield that stops him from feeling weak. And then there's Sarah, a teenager who corrects everyone and mocks every attempt at creativity. She grew up in a home where emotions were ignored. The only way to be seen was to interrupt, evaluate, and judge. Criticism became her language for connection. When you understand these examples, you begin to see that the psychology of the critic is built on defense, not dominance. Their mindset rarely comes from a place of superiority. Instead, it grows out of three major psychological forces that scientists and therapists have studied for decades. The first force is projection. The critic sees in others what they secretly fear in themselves. When they point out your weakness, they are actually reacting to their own. The second force is perfectionistic conditioning. They were likely raised in environments where mistakes were punished and success was never enough. Their brain developed a hyperactive monitoring system, constantly scanning for errors because their nervous system learned that flaws equal danger. The third force is control-seeking behavior, which stems from anxiety. Research in cognitive psychology shows that people who feel powerless in their own lives often try to control their external environment by evaluating everything around them. This creates a temporary illusion of stability. This is why critics are often more tense than confident, more fragile than powerful, and more lonely than they appear. When we look deeper into the brain itself, we discover something even more fascinating. Neuroscientists have found that chronic criticism activates the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for detecting threats. This means the critic spends most of their day in a threat state. To them, judging you feels like survival, not a preference. This is why they react so strongly to small things, why they correct your tone, your wording, your ideas. Their inner world is constantly on fire, and criticism becomes a fire extinguisher, not a weapon. When a critic attacks someone, they experience a brief moment of emotional relief. Their brain releases a tiny burst of chemicals associated with control and safety. Over time, that feeling becomes addictive. This is also why critics rarely accept criticism themselves. To their brain, it feels like emotional danger, a direct attack on their entire identity. The sensitive part of them, the part they hide so deeply, feels exposed. And that exposure feels unbearable. This leads to a destructive cycle where the critic pushes people away and then blames them for leaving. Psychologists call this a self-reinforcing cognitive loop. The very behavior meant to protect them becomes the reason they suffer. This is why critics often feel so misunderstood, so isolated, and so confused about why their relationships always seem to fall apart. When you understand this psychological pattern, you begin to see that criticism is not a personality trait. It's a shield, a defense, a coping mechanism. It's a way to avoid vulnerability, to avoid showing real feelings, and to stop people from getting too close. The critic fears intimacy because intimacy requires softness. Softness requires trust. And trust requires lowering the shield, something they simply don't know how to do. Many critics grew up too fast, carrying expectations meant for adults. Their identity formed around evaluating instead of expressing, analyzing instead of trusting, and observing instead of participating. This creates a mind that is constantly alert, constantly scanning, constantly predicting failure. The critic isn't trying to hurt others. They're trying to avoid being hurt themselves. When you recognize this, You begin to see the humanity behind their sharpness, the softness behind their comments, and the fear behind their precision. Psychological studies also show that critics often struggle with an overdeveloped superego, part of our mind responsible for rules and standards. It becomes so loud that it attacks the self and the world equally. The critic lives with an inner judge far harsher than anything they ever say aloud. Their criticism of others is often just a softer version of the thoughts they direct toward themselves every single day. This is why helping a critic heal isn't about silencing their voice. It's about teaching them to separate observation from self-worth. It's teaching them that imperfection is not danger, mistakes are not threats, and vulnerability is not weakness. They need to learn that connection doesn't require control, and empathy doesn't require silence. This journey begins with self-awareness, moves into emotional regulation, and finally evolves into learning how to communicate without fear. And when a critic heals, they can transform into something incredibly powerful. The same ability to observe details can become profound insight. The same ability to analyze behavior can become deep wisdom. That deep awareness of flaws can become the fuel for growth, innovation, creativity, and leadership. When the critic learns to refine their gift without using it as a shield, they become someone the world actually needs. Their precision becomes empathy. Their insight becomes clarity. Their voice becomes healing instead of cutting. This is the hidden psychology of the critic, the truth behind the person who always seems to have something to say. And when you understand their inner world, you realize that critics are not cold, cruel, or heartless. They are humans who learn to survive with sharp edges, and who can one day learn to replace those edges with understanding and strength. Thanks for watching Hidden Points. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the human mind. See you next time.